We're taking a closer look at the poaching crisis in Mozambique, especially in the Niassa National Reserve. It is home to some of the last remaining elephants in Africa. Mozambique has struggled to gain stability in its reserves and across the country following a 16-year civil war that ended in 1992. Wildlife analysts warn elephants in the Niassa Reserve could die by the end of this year if current poaching trends intensify. For more on the crisis, let's bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Debora Patta. She's with us from Maputo, Mozambique. So, Debora, what is causing poaching levels to continue to skyrocket?
Vlad, Mozambique is perhaps best known, well, for this: beautiful beaches, balmy tropical weather and amazing coral reefs. But what is less known is that Mozambique is also home to one of the African continent's last remaining wilderness areas, the vast, expansive Niassa wilderness, which should be able to sustain about 10,000 elephants. But as you've pointed out, these have been decimated, this population, over recent years, and now is becoming a great cause for alarm for conservationists. One of the reasons for this is the remote area of the Niassa wilderness. This is not a place that is open to game viewing. You don't see tourists going there and beautiful game lodges. It is a wilderness area, and so it's difficult to reach there. In the wet season, for example, what would normally take a day takes about 3 to 4 days to reach parts of the Niassa wilderness. And so this makes it a lot easier for poachers. They can move in on foot, set up camp, poach as many elephants as they wish, and move out before the incursion is even detected. It is so vast that it's difficult to patrol that area. It also borders Tanzania, and that means that you find poachers moving across from its neighbor to poach in this region as well. Another reason why it has been so susceptible to poachers is also the porous border between South Africa and Mozambique. You find that although there are sniffer dogs and all the apparatus that is needed to detect poaching, cars move easily between these borders, taking all sorts of contraband with us. And that is why it has become such an area open to poachers and being seen as one of the areas that is so decimated over recent years.
How is Mozambique's elephant poaching crisis different from other African countries? Are there enough tools and resources available to combat the issue?
That I think there are a number of reasons for this. Now, as I mentioned, Niassa is in northern Mozambique. It's very remote, so that is part of the problem. But in this area, there has been a complete breakdown of law and order in many of these remote regions. And an example of that is, for example, the rise of jihadist activity. This is not a country that has seen any terrorist activity in the past. But over the last year, there's been a spike in this kind of violence, and this is directly related to a breakdown in law and order. So old smuggling networks are being used. You're seeing all sorts of smuggling in those areas: human trafficking, drugs, rubies, and of course wildlife is being trafficked in that particular region. So that has become a key source of concern for the government and for conservationists dealing with this kind of thing. Mozambique also doesn't really have the resources necessary to deal with a vast area like the Niassa wilderness. So it is a country that is coming out of decades of civil war, and while it tries to revive its economy, one of the areas that has suffered the most has been conservation. So for example, if they had a helicopter, that alone would be a deterrent to poachers, but they don't even have those basic tools, and this has been a key problem in cracking down on poaching.
And Debora, catching poachers is only the first step to addressing the problem. Is it easy to sentence these people?
Vlad, you're so right. You know, the targeting of the poacher, you take out the poacher, he is at the bottom of this food chain. Take him out and there's at least half a dozen more waiting to take his place, partly due to poverty in areas like Niassa, where people readily make themselves available for this kind of work. They know how to hunt, the risks are fairly low, and so they make themselves available. The other problem has been the law in Mozambique. Now, there are many dedicated wildlife experts working in the field of conservation in Mozambique, and particularly in law enforcement. They make a lot of arrests, but this is not always held up by the courts. So poachers, for example, get taken, get arrested, but there are no consequences. And prior to about June last year, the law was actually very weak. So, for example, you could be arrested for poaching, get away with a mere fine. That has now been strengthened. You could get up to 16 years in jail. So I think that the wildlife rangers who are cracking down on this particular crime are hoping that will make a significant difference. But there's been another very important difference in Mozambique, and that is the appointment of a dedicated prosecutor in the Attorney General's office, a man by the name of Amansu Zimba. And we spoke to him, and he told us that his job is to coordinate the law. So they won't just focus on poaching, but all the crimes around this kind of criminal syndicated crime. So, for example, tracking the money, looking at money laundering, where these syndicates get the money from, and following the money. And if they bring that body of law together, they hope that this will make some kind of dent. What they're also going to do is train prosecutors around the country to deal with this crime so they can deal with it in their magisterial districts, and in that way, hopefully, also make a dent on this kind of crime. So this coming together of all these forces is something we'll only know about in the future, but certainly great strides are being made in this particular area.
So what's been the global response to the rise in poaching and the ivory trade?
The global response is very important in this area. One of the key aspects, Vlad, is funding. As I mentioned, this is a country that doesn't have huge amounts of resources available to crack down on this very serious crime. And so you're seeing a lot of countries coming to the party. For example, USAID has funded the program I just mentioned about getting a dedicated prosecutor in the Attorney General's office. And these kinds of donations should make some strides towards dealing with this crime. But the other very important thing is to see poaching as part of global crime syndicates. It's not just a little poacher going after the wildlife, and that's been a very significant shift in the thinking of how to deal with wildlife trafficking. This is a huge syndicated crime. There are Chinese syndicates, there are Vietnamese syndicates, and these syndicates are highly trained and highly armed. They go into areas with sophisticated weaponry. In some cases, they even are able to throw up drones in the Niassa area, and so they know where the rangers are hanging out. Previously, Mozambique hasn't been able to combat that because they don't have that kind of weaponry. They outgunned and they outmanned by these syndicates. So seeing this as part of a global crime syndicate and cracking down on trafficking in that way, I think there is a hope that this will make some kind of dent. So that global response is becoming more and more crucial in combating this kind of crime. Vlad?
Debora Patta in Mozambique for us. Thank you.